For many of us, TV shows and movies provide a much-needed escape from the stresses of daily life. Whether it be action, comedy, horror, or a fantasy movie, most of the time what happens on the screen would never and could never happen in real life. And that's kind of the point, to immerse yourself in a different world where anything is possible. But what if you saw a scene from your favorite movie play out in front of you? Not on the screen, but in real life. What if you were face to face with the scariest movie villain, but unable to cover your eyes with a blanket and wait for the scene to change? We've all heard the saying, the truth is stranger than fiction, and that couldn't be more true for the victim of a terrifying crime out of Oakland, Michigan. September 16th, 2019 was supposed to be a night of two old friends catching up. However, the night turned into one of the weirdest and most terrifying combinations of the films Silence of the Lambs and The Twilight Saga. Literally. Hey friends, I'm Annie Elise, and this is 10 to Life, where we talk all things true crime. So go ahead and smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and let's jump right in.
10 to Life with Annie Elise starts right now.
Rochester Hills is an affluent city in Oakland County, Michigan, and is part of the Metro Detroit area. The city is described as a prosperous suburb and one of the best places to live in Michigan. 48-year-old Allison Weaver has lived in Michigan for all of her life. Born May 1st, 1971 to parents Sophia and Robert Thompson, Allison had a pretty average childhood alongside her siblings. After high school, she always had a stable job and made her way into the staffing industry. In early 2000s, with no college education, Allison started as a recruiter and worked her way up to manager of the staffing agency that she was working for at the time. Over the years, she would work for at least 3 more staffing agencies, where her position increased each time from manager to resource manager and eventually program manager. During this time in 1999, at age 28, Allison started dating a man named William White, and the two of them would end up getting married. Just 2 years later, in 2001, the couple welcomed their first and only child together, a baby girl. The next year was a struggle for Allison and William financially, and the two of them filed for bankruptcy in 2002. And by 2003, the couple decided to divorce. Over the next several years, Allison focused on her career, rebuilding herself financially, and raising her daughter as a single mother. Even though she was single for several years, Allison had her family close by to lean on, and also made friends with some of her neighbors and mothers of her daughter's friends as well. In 2011, she decided to attend a school called Macabre University, which is less than an hour away from where Allison and her daughter were living. Getting a degree in an area like business would probably help Allison further her career, and may lead to a pay increase as well, which would have been really helpful because Allison had to file for bankruptcy again in 2012. However, during this time, Allison met a man named Jeffrey Weaver, and similarly to her relationship with William, the two of them married just 2 years later, in 2013. Jeffrey and Allison bought their first home together in 2014 and another home in 2015. At first, things seemed to be going very well for this couple, and according to people who knew them in the community, they both loved to party and socialize at one of the local restaurant bars. Jeffrey and Allison were considered regulars at this bar, and a bartender who used to work there stated that they came in almost every single day. And they were so close to the employees that their regularity at the bar actually helped Allison's daughter get a job there as a hostess in the restaurant section. People who were around Allison frequently at the bar said she kind of just seemed like the soccer mom type. She was a pretty, average working mom and maybe a little socially awkward and quiet until she started drinking and becoming more lively. Many people become much more talkative after they get some liquid courage, and Allison was no different. Allison began talking to bartenders and other regulars about some troubles that she was having in her marriage with Jeffrey. This became more obvious when, after several drinks, Allison and Jeffrey would frequently argue, and supposedly Allison was usually the aggressor in these arguments and was even asked to leave the bar several times. I can imagine this being really embarrassing for Allison's teenage daughter, and during this time it's been said that their mother-daughter relationship became strained. Her daughter is said to have a good relationship with her stepfather, and even though he was a drinker as well, people who worked at the bar described the amount that Allison drank as mass quantities, which couldn't have been easy for anyone to deal with, let alone a teenage girl who worked there. In 2017, Allison and Jeffrey did split up for a brief period, but their relationship continued on and off during 2017 and 2018, until they ultimately divorced for good in 2019. Allison's daughter was said to have wanted to live with her father, but I'm not exactly sure if they were referring to Jeffrey or William, because William went on to remarry and have 2 other children, who Allison's daughter only saw every now and then. During and after the divorce, the people who saw Allison frequently had described her as becoming more and more frazzled. Bizarrely, Jeffrey and Allison both continued to attend that same bar. They would just come and go separately, which had to have been awkward for everybody there. Allison told a few people at the bar that she was trying to find an anxiety and depression medication that would work for her, and she reportedly had several different ones out at any given time. Mixing alcohol with any medication, especially psychiatric medication, can be really dangerous and lead a person to seem and feel more intoxicated than they actually are. Even though Allison did seem belligerent at times, most people who knew her chalked it up to her going through a rough time mentally with the divorce, trying to maintain a job and the stress of being a parent to a teenager, and they thought that everything would just smooth out with a little bit of time. Maybe this was Allison's midlife crisis, and hopefully when the dust settled, things would start looking up. However, just a few months later, her drinking problem and messy divorce would look like small potatoes compared to the actual midlife crisis that was about to occur in Allison's life. I mentioned earlier that during the years Allison was single, she became friends with some of her neighbors where she and her daughter were living at the time. One of the neighbors had a daughter the same age as Allison's little girl, which at the time was around 6 years old, and they became close friends. The girls and the moms remained friendly over the years, but after several moves and during Allison's new marriage, they all just naturally drifted apart and only stayed in touch here and there, and mostly through Facebook. On Tuesday, September 17th, 2019, Allison and her old friend and neighbor had been chatting on Facebook Messenger, and I'm going to refer to this friend as Jane. Neither Jane nor Allison had anything to do that night, so Jane asked if Allison wanted to come over and catch up in person. It was obvious that she had been through a lot recently, and Jane felt like Allison needed a friend and wanted to be there for her old neighbor. Allison, who had already been drinking, accepted the invitation and called an Uber to give her a ride to Jane's apartment. When Allison arrived, she brought with her 2 open bottles of alcohol that she had already been drinking for her and Jane to share. Jane could tell that Allison was already pretty drunk, but it didn't bother her right away because she wanted to drink as well and have a good time with her old friend and catch up. The 2 stood in the kitchen for a minute while Jane fixed herself a drink from one of the bottles that Allison had brought. The 2 had not seen each other for a really long time, so when Allison moved in for a hug, Jane figured it was just because she had missed her old friend. However, as Allison hugged Jane, instead of a platonic kiss on the cheek or something like that, Allison came in hot and came toward her with an open mouth kiss. This came as a huge surprise to Jane, but she decided to just kind of shrug it off and move out of the kitchen. She figured it was because Allison was drunk and didn't really think too much about it. The 2 of them sat on the couch together and drank and talked for hours about the old times and things going on in both of their lives. They also smoked some MJ together, and Jane stated that while Allison was clearly inebriated, she herself had only drank enough to have a good buzz. There are some conflicting reports about what happened next, with some saying that Allison had made some sexually suggestive comments towards Jane, and some saying that Allison, being so intoxicated, was just getting on Jane's nerves. Whatever it was, Jane was tired, and something that Allison had said had annoyed her. She told Allison, "Just leave me alone, I'm going to bed." She got up from the couch and went down the hall into her bedroom. I'm not sure if she had expected Allison to then call an Uber to go home, or if she thought that Allison would just go to sleep on the couch and pass out. But Jane laid in her bed and quickly fell asleep due to being a little bit tipsy and pretty tired. Just a warning, this is when the story gets really crazy and could possibly get triggering for some people. Just a few hours later, Jane was startled awake and turned on her bedside light. Nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to see. There at the end of her bed was Allison, completely naked and crouched in an animal-like position on all 4s. Jane hopped out of bed and said, "Allison, what are you doing? What's going on here?" And Jane had stated that Allison was just staring at her with this terrifying look on her face and moving her head back and forth like some sort of rabid animal. Jane yelled at Allison again, asking, "Allison, are you okay? What are you doing?" And suddenly, Allison lunged towards Jane, pushed her onto the bed, and started strangling her. Jane was trying her best to fight off Allison, but was much smaller than her and kept falling in and out of consciousness with Allison's hand around her neck.
And I just was like, Allison, what are you doing? And she just kept giving me this look, like with her head going back and forth. And I was like, what are you doing? And she just lunged at me. And she just lunged at me and started strangling me. The next thing I remember is trying to get away and her hearing her as clear as day, with like no reflection in her tone, just saying, sorry, but you're gonna have to die today.
The two fell onto the floor, and Jane begged and pleaded for Allison to stop, but Allison stated it's too late, and Jane lost consciousness again. When she woke up, she said that she could feel that there was a piece of her cheek missing and could feel blood gushing from her ear. She said that she could feel pain all over her body and could also feel that she had been raped. During the commotion, one of Jane's downstairs neighbors could hear banging and women screaming from the apartment above and thought that there was a fight going on. The neighbor called 911 and police quickly arrived at Jane's apartment. When police entered the residence, in the back bedroom, they came across an extremely bloody scene and saw Jane lying on the ground and Allison on her knees, kneeling over her. The officer stated that he could see that Jane was clearly very injured with a portion of her cheek and her ear missing. When asked what was going on, one officer stated that Jane had a very dazed and confused look on her face, and Allison seemed to almost be in a cheerful mood, like she was having a great time. She told the officers that her and Jane were having consensual sex and role-playing, that she was a wolf, and that Jane was a vampire.
When I walked in the bedroom, I observed two females. Both appeared to be covered in blood. Miss Weaver told me that they were having consensual sex and that Miss was a vampire and that Miss Weaver, was a wolf. I noticed a large wound to the side of her left eye area in the cheek. And I also noticed that the outer edge of her left ear appeared to be missing.
Now, if that is exactly what Allison said, that would be a really weird way to answer a question. Like, oh, hey, yeah, we were just having consensual sex. You'd think if it were actually consensual, she would just say, oh, we were having sex, not actually emphasize the consensual part. But anyways, at the scene, the police located the bottles of alcohol that the women had been drinking, remnants of the MJ that they had been smoking, and the prescription medication that Allison had brought with her. Both of the women were taken to the hospital, where it was quickly discovered that this attack had been anything but consensual. Not only had Allison bitten off a portion of Jane's ear and a chunk of her face, but Jane had bite marks all over her entire body, including her arms, legs, stomach, breasts, back, and pelvic region. Her neck was swollen and she already had bruises all over her body as well. Allison, who was uninjured besides some light defensive bruises from Jane, stayed at the hospital to undergo detox and for testing of substances in her system. After the detox, she was arrested. In Allison's mugshot photo, you can see how different she looks from normal pictures of her. It appears she has wild red hair, but in actuality, Allison has dirty blonde to light brown hair. And if you look closely at this photo, you'll see that the red in her hair is actually dried blood. The sentencing hearing just took place this past October for the crimes that were committed that Monday night in 2019. And the results will shock you, maybe even more than the horrific details of the case itself. Allison was charged with second-degree criminal sexual misconduct assault with intent to do great bodily harm, assault with intent to maim, and assault by strangulation. At her arraignment, the prosecutor in the case asked for there to be a high cash bond of at least $200,000, but ultimately, due to Allison having no prior legal issues, simply more than a speeding ticket, she was given a $75,000 bond, which she paid and was released on a tether.
Her attorney says she's a single mom and should be let out on bond.
Gainfully employed, single mom, member of our community her entire life. This is an isolated incident, Judge. She's never been in trouble before, no prior criminal history.
But investigators on the case spoke up.
I respectfully would like to ask for a high cash bond, a minimum of $200,000.
Saying the victim here is badly injured and is still in the hospital. They're asking for a high bond. and serious limitations on Weaver if she is released on a tether.
I know the victim is still in the hospital. I'm not sure when she's getting out, and she has several serious injuries.
The majority of the court proceedings were not publicized, and the victim, Jane, which that's not her real name, was able to remain anonymous during the litigation. The prosecution and Allison's legal team were able to reach a sentencing agreement in exchange for her pleading guilty to the charges against her, and the stipulation that she would file on the registry after serving her time in prison. The sentencing hearing took place in October 2022, and before the judge gave her ruling on whether to uphold the plea agreement, Jane was able to give a victim impact statement.
On September 16th, 2019, my life changed forever. I let Allison Thompson Weaver in my home, and in return she tried to kill me. If the police hadn't shown up when they did, from neighbors calling 911, I wouldn't be here today. I have some memories of the attack that night, like bits and pieces of a horror movie. First of waking up in my own bed to find her in some animal-like crawling position, naked, ready to pounce on me. Her strangling me, the expression on her face, until I was unconscious. The extreme pain I felt as I regained consciousness and could not move from being raped, beaten, and literally eaten alive from head to toe. I knew in my head what was happening to me, and I couldn't do a thing about it. And then she whispered the words, "You have to die." I begged her, "I'll do anything you want." But she laughed and replied, "It's too late," and began strangling me again a second time. This time I saw my loved ones flash before my eyes, and I saw a bright light, and I saw the end of my life. That's all I remember until the hospital. I do remember seeing pure evil in her eyes, though, and I truly believe nothing can save her. Every hour of every day I deal with excruciating pain because of what she did to me and the countless bite wounds, including my breasts and vagina. I have permanent nerve damage all over my face and body. She bit off my ear and literally consumed parts of me, like my cheek, for instance. The pain in my neck, shoulder, and back, even with physical therapy, is only getting worse. I have been trying to avoid more surgeries, if possible, than I've already had. Talking about this does not fully express my emotions. The hundreds of pictures of what she did to me are absolutely horrendous and disgusting to look at. I am unrecognizable in those photos, and they just begin to show what this cannibalistic rapist put me through, all the while with a smile on her face. I'm learning to live with the pain and countless scars, as well as the countless stares I receive. But what is scaring me is the nonstop visions of her demon eyes killing me, and the fact that she will try to do this again someday. No one knows why she chose me to be her victim that night. The doctors at the hospital said it was nothing short of a miracle that I survived that attack that night. In closing, I don't think it's fair that she has taken so much away from me that I can never get back. She stole a part of me. She broke a part of me. She took away my sense of safety and trust, and so much more. Everything that this thing has done to me deserves more than 10 to 15 years behind bars. I will be living with these problems, pains, images, and fears for the rest of my life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After the horrifying and emotional statement, the judge addressed the court and said that this case was more violent than anything she had seen in over 25 years, and reading the facts of this case was like reading the script of a horror movie. She also referred to the attack as an abomination. The audio in the courtroom videos are a little hard to hear, but this is the only footage available from the hearing.
The victim started off, her statement was, it was like being in a horror movie. And I wrote that down because when I reviewed the PSI, and I had to read it a few times because I couldn't believe what I was reading. And then when I talked to Mr. Cabot about it, first thing out of his mouth was, it was like reading a script for a horror movie. I can't even imagine what you were going through. I've never seen any pictures from it or any photographs, and I can't imagine what the scene looked like. And I've never ever understood anyone being violent toward another human being. But I've said it, which I've never said twice in the same way, but I've been up here for 25 years, and I've seen murder cases that were not nearly as violent as this case. And I can't imagine psychologically where you were in doing this to her, and the excuses that were made for it. And then this was the first time I saw the medical records in terms of all the wounds on her body and her face and her genitalia. Horrific is not even the word for it. I mean, what man suffers on to man, we've all heard that before, but this is an abomination. And the strength that you showed, ma'am, in showing up here today and making your statement is amazing, and I appreciate it. And you should know how strong you are, that you're able to come up here and say your piece. Many others could not have done that. And I hope you use that strength to go forward. And don't let her make you any less than what you are. And that is an incredibly strong human being who has amazing support. I've said this before. I've read all those letters. You have an amazing support system who only want the very best for you. And I do wish you everything to become as completely healthy as possible in every way. And thank you again for being here. Thank you. I know you want more time than has been bargained by the prosecutor's office. But understand what was bargained for, the guidelines are lower than the killer group. In other words, they bargained for a higher sentence than I would have had to give reasons to go higher than the guidelines. And that's not necessary here because there was an agreement for it. And I think this is the correct resolution to this particular matter. Because I don't think that these charges would ever have intended to reflect what actually happened here. These charges are not what was seen here. So in some ways, it's a gift what these charges are. It could have been worse. And I'm glad it wasn't worse for you physically. So I will follow the guide of the killer group in this matter.
In what some might consider a slap on the wrist, Allison was sentenced to 10 to 15 years for the attack against Jane. When given the opportunity to address the court, Allison gave a very lackluster statement that undoubtedly didn't make the victim feel any better and may have made the court feel like she was insincere in her apology about what happened.
I would like to apologize to the victim and to her family, and also to my family as well. I do feel really, really horrible about what happened. I wish I could take it away.
If you didn't catch what she said, Allison stated that she wanted to apologize to the victim and her family, as well as her own family, and that she is really, really sorry about what happened and she wishes she could take it away. I don't know about you, but I just wish that she would have tried to provide some sort of explanation for her actions or spoke from the heart a little bit more, given that the situation ruined her life, her daughter and her family's lives, and the life of her victim for the foreseeable future. Jane will probably need years of therapy to deal with trust issues and ever trusting anybody again, and also several more surgeries to recover from the injuries that Allison inflicted on her on that night. When I first read about this case, my mind immediately went to a story from several years ago about a man in Florida that randomly attacked someone on the street and started biting him and eating his face. Everyone assumed that he was under the influence of bath salts, and I remember there being a fear of bath salts turning people into cannibal zombies. However, when the man underwent toxicology testing, the results showed that he only had a small amount of Mary Jane in his system. Most people would never consider becoming violent, and definitely not cannibalistic as a side effect of weed. So what is it that causes people to snap like this? I did mention before that Allison was on several types of psychiatric meds, and that some of her pills were found at the crime scene. Mixing alcohol and psychiatric drugs is never a good idea. But there have actually been some prescription medications that have led people to becoming violent, unpredictable, and going into psychotic episodes. There are also some studies that show that people with pre-existing mental health conditions who smoke MJ are more likely to experience psychosis than people without mental health disorders. Without being able to read Allison's evaluations, I don't think there is any way to know for sure what exactly happened to her that night that would have caused her to completely just snap and attack her friend. Surprisingly, Jane did admit that when her and Allison's daughters were very young, she and Allison did kiss each other on at least one occasion. Maybe it's possible that Allison took Jane inviting her over as something more than just two friends catching up, especially since she did try to open-mouth kiss Jane right after she arrived. The fact that Allison thought that she and Jane were having consensual sex is just so bizarre, and I think it shows that she was delusional at the time. And hypothetically, even if they were having consensual sex, nobody would consent to having their face and ear bitten off. I think that anyone who has gone through or seen a loved one go through a really difficult time in their life, such as a messy divorce and falling into drug or alcohol abuse as a way to cope, might be able to feel some empathy for Allison. I think that with the stress she was dealing with and then falling further and further into addiction led to a horrible combination that pushed her mental state over the edge, and she really did have a psychotic break. Allison's ex-husband Jeff made a comment on Facebook to her father which insinuates that he had reached out to them before about Allison needing help with her drinking problem. The comment says, "Bob, as much as in my heart I wish she would have listened to me, there is no way in hell she was taking drugs that would make her do something like this. She is a blackout drunk, honestly, but not drugs like that. She needs help, but not this. I don't want anything to do with you or your family, but I will put my hand on a Bible stating that this didn't happen like this." So obviously Jeff thinks that her alcohol abuse and her mental state were to blame for what happened, and not necessarily drugs. Jane said in her victim impact statement that she saw evil in Allison's eyes, and maybe some people just really are taken over by evil, and there truly is no rhyme or reason why. Regardless, after seeing photos of Allison and videos of her in court, you can tell that something was seriously wrong with her that night. In her mugshot photo, she doesn't even look like the same person. Her eyes, the way her mouth is twisted up, she really does look like something got a hold of her. And at the arraignment, you can tell that she was still not all there either, whether that was drugs, alcohol, a mixture of prescriptions, or something else we may never know. So I hope that Allison is able to get the help that she needs in prison, but more importantly, and most importantly, I hope that the victim in this case is able to overcome the trauma she experienced that night. I hope that what happened to her doesn't completely destroy her view of humanity and make her not want to trust people or befriend anybody ever again. Physically, I can't imagine the pain that she went through and still goes through, and the scars must be a constant reminder of what happened. The fact that she was so close to being killed and that the downstairs neighbor heard her and called 911 is just an absolute miracle and shows that she was meant to survive. I also can't help but feel sad for Allison's daughter, who was still in high school when all of this took place. We all know how cruel kids can be in normal circumstances, and I imagine when everyone found out about this, that it was really hard for her. Not only does she have to continue on without her mom while she's in prison, but she has to deal with the confusion about how and why this all happened as well. Overall, this is just such a sad and strange story, and will hopefully encourage people who are struggling mentally or with substance abuse to get the help that they need. I'm curious to know what you guys think about this case. Do you think it was just a mental break, or do you think it was something else? Do you think that when she said that they were having consensual sex, she truly believed it? Do you think that was just a cover? this case puzzles me because it's very rare that we see one like this. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks again for tuning in with me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the case coverage. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe if you haven't done so already. That way you will be notified of new case videos as they get posted in the future. All right, guys, thanks again. And until the next one, stay safe.